this meeting, our meeting here today, never happened. You were never here. I was never here. What we say today will disappear like dust on the wind. The only place these words should linger is in your hearts and in your minds. What we do and say must remain a secret, so nobody gets hurt. I think we are safe. I am fairly certain we can have our meeting today without interruption. However, should we have any unexpected visitors, we will tell them that we are having a meeting of the Associated Consolidation of the Canning and Pickling Society. There, we'll just leave this here. Well, it isn't really a lie, is it? I mean, we all like pickles, don't we? Anyone not like pickles? Well, we have canned peaches and sweet plums in our society too. Nobody could possibly dislike those, I hope. It is good to see so many of you here. Now, to the business at hand. I am Margaret Ella Scott, a conductor on the railroad. I know, this isn't a train station. There is no train in sight, and I'm not taking tickets. It's the underground railroad. What does that mean? Well, it's not underground, and it's not a railroad. It's people. People just like you, just like me. Shopkeepers, blacksmiths, farmers and teachers. Mothers, fathers, fishermen, millers, and preachers. It's anybody who offers food or clothes or a place to hide or any kind of help whatsoever to the runaway slaves. Imagine it. Someone puts a heavy cast iron chain around your neck or both your ankles so you can't run. And then you are led up onto a block to be stared at, clanking with every step, while the chains cut into your wrists and ankles. You are told to stand up there, to turn around, while the slave trader calls out facts about you. 5'2", 100 pounds, good cook, very obedient. Or 6 foot, 215 pounds, very strong, works all day without stopping, needs to be beaten once in a while. How would you feel? Or even worse, they take you away from your family, your parents, your loved ones. Let's say you can sew well, or you're good at chopping wood, and you're healthy, and the slave trader knows this about you. He knows he can get a good price for you. So he puts you on the auction block, and people bid against each other to buy you. He doesn't care if you're separated from your mother, your child, your brother or sister. How would it feel to know you would never see your family again? Boys and girls as young as 10 or 11 are sold as slaves and begin working at that age. Can we stand by and let this happen? Now, there are people who want slavery. Most of them are the cotton farmers who depend on slave labor to do all the endless amounts of work on the plantations. Some of these men have as many as 700 slaves. In order to keep them working and stuck on the plantations, they strive to keep the slaves ignorant and won't let them learn to read or write. They won't let them look the master in the eye. They discipline them with beatings and whippings. You see, with the invention of the cotton gin, the cleaning of the cotton has begun to go so fast that the farmers need to pick more than ever. So they push, and they push, working the slaves to the bone for their own profit. Now, some of these people say that the slaves are better off living on the plantations, that they don't have enough initiative or ingenuity to make it on their own, or that they're not intelligent enough and they need to be taken care of. Well, how do you think our railroad got started? by slaves. They desperately wanted their freedom and began to find ways to escape. Soon word spread, and free blacks in the North began to help them too. They devised secret ways to communicate and clever ways to head north. Now, if that isn't a demonstration of intelligence and ingenuity, I don't know what is. Then, people from all walks of life began to offer safe haven to these runaways on their journey, often under the cloak of night, and always in secret. Because we work in secret, we often don't know anyone's name. Our names will not go down in history. There are no medals of honor for this work. But in our hearts, we know we are doing the right thing. Let me show you something. Cargo arriving on tomorrow's evening train. More parcels to follow next week. This was given to me at Mr. Shaw's dry goods store by my friend Ava Higbee, a Quaker like me. We discussed the price of linen and my husband's new driving horse, and then she handed me this note, casual as can be. The cargo means a runaway slave. If this note should get into the wrong hands, they would just think I'm expecting some packages. It's part of our secret code. It means that we can expect runaway slaves at our house sometime tomorrow evening. We never know exactly when we'll hear the soft knock, knock, knock on the back door. 2 weeks ago, it was well past midnight. John, my husband, heard the sound and opened the door to find 2 young runaways. A girl of 12 and her brother of 14, wide-eyed and shivering from the cold. Come in, you must be hungry. I got out buttermilk and biscuits and a slice of ham and took them to the cellar. They didn't say a word as they gobbled their food. Slow down. You're safe. We'll keep you here until it's time to move on. They crouched in fear and ate hungrily, staring at me all the while. Then I heard the dogs, hound dogs, must have been a pack of them, yelping and howling, getting closer. I raced up the stairs and closed the cellar door, leaving those poor children in the dark. I didn't dare leave the lantern down there in case light should leak out through the cracks in the door. I came up to find my husband had tied a kerchief around his head, covering one eye, and he was lying on a bench in our side room off the kitchen. He motioned to his head, whispering, "Bad headache, pain in the eye. You're preparing a plaster for me." Suddenly there was a pounding on the door. I nodded silently to John. "Coming!" I opened the door. "What is it? What's going on?" "We heard something over here and saw your lights on. What are you people doing up at this hour?" "My husband is not well, and I'm preparing him a plaster." John groaned loudly from the next room. "Sorry, ma'am. I'm the marshal, and we're on the hunt for 2 runaway slaves. Children, both of them. They pushed their way into the room with their filthy boots and their guns, looking all around the room and peering into the kitchen. One man stayed outside with the dogs who were baying and howling, straining at their ropes. We haven't seen anyone. I'll be on the lookout, though. Is there a reward?" I tried to look greedy. "Sure is. $200. And if the mother is found, $500 for all 3. You could make yourself a pretty penny. So keep your ears open and your eyes peeled." "Oh, I will. We could sure use the money. Times are hard. Money is scarce. You know, John, we could use a new wagon." I smiled at the men and showed them to the door. One of them stopped and looked at me suspiciously. "You sure there's nobody else here? Something don't seem right." No, no. I'm just trying to make my husband well. Now, if you'll excuse us. For several minutes, we could hear the baying of the dogs and the gruff voices of the men as they circled the house. Had I not convinced them? Finally, the sounds drifted off into the woods. John and I looked at each other with relief, and I realized I had been holding my breath. If we were caught, it would mean jail for certain. We could lose everything. Then we took the lantern back down to the cellar. There they were, holding on to each other and shivering with fright. 2 evenings later, we saw the sign. Down the road at the preacher's house, a quilt like this hung on the gate. It looks just like someone's airing out a quilt, but we know it's another part of our secret code. You see, patterns on the quilts mean different things, and this tumbling blocks pattern means it's time to move. In other words, it was time for us to move the children. That night, we took them to the preacher's house with a sack of biscuits and dried apples. They climbed into the back of his wagon, and we covered them as best we could with bags of grain. Down the road they went, on their way to Canada, on their way to freedom. We prayed that the mother would soon follow, but we have not yet heard anything of her. Well, there are many more stories of bravery and daring, as many as there are runaways and people who help them, both free and slave. Let me tell you another story. Let me tell you about William and Ellen Craft. They were slaves deep in southern Georgia, and they yearned to be free. They plotted and planned and whispered late into the nights, trying to figure out how they might ever reach the free states in the north so far away. They could not imagine how they might make that long journey without being caught. Until they came up with an ingenious plan. Ellen was very light-skinned, so she could pass for white. Tall and slim as she was, she could appear to be a man, a young master of a plantation, who would surely be in need of an attentive slave to help him travel. William Craft was just the man to act that part. They slowly began to collect money and clothing for the trip. In order that Ellen not have to speak and reveal her feminine voice, they tied a long muffler around her head as if the young master suffered a toothache and couldn't speak. This also covered up Ellen's beardless face. Then, so that she not have to write, which Ellen couldn't do, they put her right arm in a sling. To complete the picture of sickness and frailty, they put thick glasses on Ellen's face and a cane in her left hand. Then they began their journey north as master and slave. In order to avoid suspicion, they traveled in the light of day, as any normal travelers would. They stopped at a hotel in Charleston, where both master and servant were treated with much respect. "Let me help you to your room, sir," they'd say to Ellen. And to William, "Boy, you sleep in the shed and wait till your master calls for you in the morning." The same thing happened in Richmond, Virginia. On they went to Baltimore, so close to their final destination. Only this time, the ticket seller in the train depot denied a ticket for the slave. "Of course your master may have a ticket, but it is the rule of this office to require a bond for all Negroes applying for tickets to go north, and none but gentlemen of well-known responsibility will be taken." William Craft, acting as the dutiful servant, replied, "I know nothing of this. I am simply traveling with my young master, who is in a very bad way. In fact, It is feared he may not make it to Philadelphia, where he is to receive new medical treatment. If we do not make haste, he cannot be detained. Ellen tried to look annoyed by the delay, but in reality, she was terrified. What if he asked her to sign something? What if he looked at her more closely? Would he see that she was a woman? They would be beaten and sent back to a life of hardship, even worse than before. All right, we'll waive the old rule just this once. And he furnished the necessary tickets. Now they were only one train ride away from freedom. With heads down and hearts pounding, they endured the seemingly endless train ride. Finally, they arrived. Scarcely had they set foot on free soil in that city of brotherly love when they were taken to a safe house. The aches were gone, and off came the sling. The toothache was gone, and off went the muffler. Sight was restored, and off went the glasses. And as Ellen dropped her cane, she was a woman once again, dancing for joy in the arms of her husband, free at last. Well, word of their amazing story has spread throughout the land, much to the frustration of the slave hunters. But it inspires us all, slaves and sympathetic free people, to risk our own safe and comfortable lives for the freedom of another. Well, all this talk about courage and daring and fear gets me all riled up. And when I'm riled, well, what better remedy than a salty, vinegary pickle? I think I better take a taste. Much better. Besides, if anyone should ask, you must tell them that they were dilly garlic pickles. That's very important. My grandmother's secret recipe. She was very particular about her recipe. She used double the amount of garlic. Oh my. Well, there are many more stories. There's the story of Box Brown, who had himself shipped to Philadelphia in a box where he traveled with only water and a biscuit for 26 hours, sometimes traveling upside down. Or the one about the parents who shipped their young son in a trunk all the way to Canada, accompanied by an elderly Quaker woman. She would have the trunk brought to her room each night at the inn, and there she would feed her secret charge and let him sleep in a bed, only to pack him up the next morning for the bumpy journey north. Or the group of slaves, pretending to be part of a funeral procession, who marched right through the town and out the other side on the road north. Or the countless stories of slaves listening for songs of freedom as they work the fields. They sing in code, so the overseer will not understand that they are giving someone the sign to leave that night or the next. One of the songs you might hear out in the fields is "Follow the Drinking Gourd." Follow the drinking gourd, follow the drinking gourd. The old man's a-waitin' for to carry you to freedom. Follow the drinking gourd. The drinking gourd is the Big Dipper, which points to the North Star. The old man is the conductor on the railroad, just like me. Then they leave their plantations in the dead of night, and they throw some bacon grease behind them to cover their trail and throw the dogs off their scent. They watch for lanterns in the windows of houses, barns, and boats, hoping to be shepherded to safe houses and on to freedom. They wade through swamps filled with leeches and alligators and snakes. They cross woods filled with wildcats and coyotes. And they sleep in the open where mosquitoes and biting flies cover them. And they look for the quilts, hanging on gates or out windows. For what could be more natural than a quilt airing on a fence. And they read the signs. Like this one, the star pattern. This means follow the North Star. Or the log cabin pattern. This says to look for a log cabin with a candle in the window, which will be a safe house. Or this one, drunkard's path. This says to move in a crooked path and avoid the main roads. That urge, that burning need to be free is what keeps our brothers and sisters going. The masters can whip them and beat them and force them to work longer, harder days under the blistering sun. But instead of bringing them down, it only adds fuel to the fires of their courage, the courage to risk their lives, the courage to look into the night and hope for a sign, trusting that more signs will follow, that more friendly faces will find them, hide them, feed them, and move them on their way. Those friendly faces are you and me. Shh. Did you hear something? That is how they come, those slave traders. They sneak up quietly and without warning, hoping to find us harboring fugitives. And then we're in trouble, big trouble. I won't fool you. If we are caught, we can be put in jail. But even worse, slaves can be found even in free territory and returned to their masters, where they are punished and worked to the bone for their wrongdoing. Life becomes even more unbearable for a slave who has been returned after escaping. This is all because of our terrible fugitive slave law. 3 years ago, with the Compromise of 1850, a second fugitive slave law was enacted, and it requires all good citizens of the United States to cooperate in catching runaways. This law is a blight on our national pride for those of us Americans who know that slavery is wrong and who endeavor to keep all people free. Before this law, slaves who reached the free states in the North were themselves free. But now they must travel even farther north, to Canada, to the only place where they can be assured of their safety. Now I'll tell you my story. I'll tell you about when I was 10 years old and something happened that changed my life forever. It is the reason I am here today, talking to you. When I was a little girl, I knew very little about slavery, except that as Quakers we didn't like it. My papa was a farmer, and both he and my mama worked hard. My aunt and uncle lived close by, and Papa and Uncle William helped each other farm. I played with my cousins, and Mama and Aunt Elizabeth schooled us at home. We got in the buggy only on Sundays to go to Quaker meeting. I had never seen a slave. The next night after I'd gone to bed, there was a commotion downstairs. And when I went down to the kitchen to say, "What is it? What's happening?" Mama said, "Go back to bed. We'll explain in the morning." Well, the next morning I awoke early, before the rest of the family, and when I got up, I noticed that the low door to the attic was open. Well, I like to play in there sometimes, so I got down on all fours and crawled in. When my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I saw 2 people asleep. And the most amazing thing was, they looked so different from me. They had hair as black as coal, and their skin was the rich dark brown of the earth. Lying on quilts with folded potato sacks for pillows, there was a girl, maybe about my age, and a woman that I thought must be her mother. I was so scared that I backed out of the attic without saying a word, scarcely able to breathe. When I stood up in the hall, I backed right into Papa's arms. "Shh," he said. "Come here." He took my hand and led me downstairs to the kitchen. "Margaret, you are 10 years old now, and you are old enough to understand what I am about to say. You know that we believe slavery is wrong. It is a cruel and horribly unjust way for anyone to live. Nobody can ever own another person. You know that as Quakers, we believe that all people are created equal in the eyes of God. But today, now, belief is not enough. It is time for action. We must stand up for what we believe in. Many of the slaves are trying to escape to the north, to a life they can call their own. We must do what we can to help them. It is our responsibility as free people to help our brothers and sisters in bondage. We can offer the slaves food and clothes and a place to hide. They can stay in the attic, like the girl and her mother who came to us last night, or they can stay here." He took my hand and led me to the sitting room. He pushed back the rug to show me a hidden trap door. There was a hole where you put in your finger to pull it up, and below was a set of stairs to a second cellar. "You must keep this a secret, Margaret. I know Mama has told you not to keep secrets, but this is one that you must keep, or it could mean trouble for all of us." So that's how I met Sarah Jane. She and her mama stayed with us 2 weeks. They were the first of many slaves that we would help on their road to freedom. I went down to the cellar whenever I could, and Sarah Jane and I would talk and play. She was 10 years old too, and she liked to cook and sew and play with dolls, just like me. She liked to skip and tell stories and pick flowers, just like me. She could even quilt, something I hadn't learned yet. She even liked pickles, just like me. But she was a slave, and her mama was a slave, and they were on the run. Sometimes in the evening when it was dark out, they'd come upstairs to get some fresh air and move around. Sarah Jane's mother would chat and laugh with my mama. I remember my mama saying, "I'll bet you miss your home." And Sarah Jane's mother said, "I don't have a home. I won't have a home until we are in a free land. Freedom is my home." Then Papa got a message saying packages on their way tonight. That meant it would be time for them to move on. Mama dressed them in her best dark clothes with shawls and bonnets. A carriage came up our lane, pulling a big black wagon with a casket on the back. The driver said very little except that they should get in, keep their heads down, and hope and pray they wouldn't be stopped. And if they should be stopped, they must pretend to be in mourning and begin weeping and wailing if possible. Off they went into that moonless night with quick kisses and hugs and Godspeed. I cried. I cried for missing my new friend. I cried for my friend's long journey. I cried for the hard life she knew. As my papa said, it's just an accident that we are free, and she is not. About 4 years later, I received a package in the mail, all the way from Windsor, Canada. When I opened the brown paper tied with string, this is what I found. For Margaret, from Sarah Jane. True friends forever. I often think about Sarah Jane. I wonder where she is now. If she married, if she had children, if she managed to stay free. And every time I have the opportunity to help another runaway along the railroad, I don't hesitate. I don't ask, should I do this? Because I know a true friend is in need. I've carried this with me for a long time. Someday I'll get around to putting it in a quilt of my own. But for now, I like to keep it close to remind me why I do this. I remember every face that has passed through our house. I remember the scared looks and the mistrusting eyes and the grateful hugs. I remember all the smiles and shy glances and tearful sighs. I can see the gnarled hands worn with work, and I can see the young, smooth hands of the ones who had their lives ahead of them. I remember how I felt the day my friend drove away from me on her road to freedom, on her road home. And I know that the price I pay is very small compared to the price she paid. I hope and pray we won't have this discussion of slavery forever. I hope that better days await us all. But ask yourself this: if you knew someone was being treated unfairly, and you knew you could reach out and help them, would you do it? Could you risk your own comfort to help another? Could you be a true friend? I will close our meeting today with the credo of the Anti-Slavery Society. If you come to us and are hungry, we will feed you. If thirsty, we will give you a drink. If in need of clothes, we will clothe you. If sick, we will minister to your necessities. If in prison, we will visit you. If in need of a hiding place from the face of the pursuer, we will provide one that even bloodhounds will not scent out. Thank you all for coming to this meeting today. Remember, anything you do, anything at all, to help someone on their road to freedom is valuable. Whether it is as small as a scrap of meat, or as big as a safe shelter house, or if it is a pair of shoes for weary feet, or a cloak for warmth on a cold, damp night, or if it is 10 cents thrust into an outstretched hand for a loaf of bread, or $100 for train tickets. It is all part of the railroad, the Underground Railroad. Oh, and don't forget, if anyone should ask, tell them the pickles were delicious. Thank you, and goodbye.